Next, what I want to do is to check to make sure that this new username, is not already taken by someone in the application. So I'm gonna go ahead here and see if I can find another user by that username. So I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna place it here, and I'm gonna pass in this new username instead, like so. And I'm gonna call this user by username. Okay, so this is the current user and this is the user by username. So I'm checking to see if there is a user in my application currently using this username. Okay, so now I'm gonna do if, didn't mean to do that. So if this username, this user, right, if I find one, if it's not null, right, oops, and I also have to check to make sure that it's not the same person. So for instance, if they didn't change their username, so they're passing in the same username, so that means that this user is this user right here. Let's say they didn't change their username, but they're updating their email, and you'll see why I'm doing all of this. I'm going to explain why I'm doing this, because I'm going to use this validate new username and email every time someone is either creating a new account or updating their account. That's why I'm making it so generic. So here I'm going to check to make sure that this is not null, right? And if their IDs are the same. So I'm going to take this current user, right? And I'm going to get their ID, get ID. And I want to make sure that this ID does not equal the username, user by username that get ID. Okay, so if these two IDs don't match, I know that. You can see I put the not notation in front of it. So if these two don't match, I know this user is like a brand new user that I was able to find by that username. So here I can then say the username is already in existence. So I can throw new username exists exception, and I can just say user name already exists, like this. Okay, and I can stop here. So because I throw this exception here now, the execution of the method will stop, so the method will not continue to execute. And lastly, I have to do a similar thing for the email, just so I can check to make sure that I don't have an existing user using that email. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and go down here, and I'm gonna call this user by email, and I'm gonna call find by email instead of by username. And here I'm just gonna pass in the email that they pass in. So again, I'm checking to make sure that this user right here, user by email, is not null, and I'm also checking to make sure that the current user and the user by email, they don't have the same IDs. Then in that case, then I can say email exists exception. So email exists exception. Okay, so if you guys want to quickly go through this with me, so what I'm doing here, I'm trying to send the exception depending on what happens here when I try to find to see if any of those username are already in existence in the application. So I'm making sure that the current username is not blank. Okay, otherwise, if the current username is blank, then I know I'm dealing with a new user. In that case, the rest of the logic is gonna go down here, which I'm gonna do in a second. So all I'm doing here, I'm checking to see if the current username of the current user is null. Okay, if I can find a user by that. So if I try to find a user in a database and it's null, then I know this user doesn't exist. So I just throw user not found. Okay, so that's that. And then next, I take the new username that they're passing. Let's say they're updating their username. So I take that new username and then I try to find a user. If that user, if I found a user, right, that's not null. So there's a user here. However, their ID don't match, meaning the current user ID, which is this, does not equal the ID of this user. And I know those IDs, they're unique because they're the primary key. So I know this user right here on line 64 is a brand new user. That's not this user right here. So I'm going to say username already exists because I was able to find another user by that username. And I'm doing the same here for the email. Okay. So if this is not the case, then I can just return that user. Okay. So let's go here, and you can see here, I can just return current user. Okay. So in case that this is empty, which is the current username, so I know this is a new user, like a brand new user, and they're just passing in the new username and the new email. So in that case, I just have to check this, do these two checks. I don't have to do this one again because I know that's a new user. So I'm gonna do those two checks, and then I'm gonna either throw this exception or that other one. So here I'm gonna go here and do else. If they didn't pass in a current user, right? They didn't pass in anything for the current username. So that means that this is a new user. So I'm just gonna deal with the actual user, not user not found, but email exists or username exists. So else I'm gonna do something similar here. So I'm gonna do find user by username. I'm gonna do this, okay? And I can name those the same. As you can see, they have the same name, find user by username here, because they're not in the same scope. As you can see, this if statement end here. And the function will either throw an exception or exit. So I can also use the same name here. You can change that name if you want, but it's not really a problem. So here, if I try to find a username, and then I do if this user, right here, if it's not null, that means I found someone by that username, then I'll just throw the same exception, which is username already exists. So I'm just gonna copy this and open close curly braces, and I throw this exception. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the user by email. So I'm just gonna copy this, and after that if statement, I'm gonna put this down here. So I'm gonna do user by email, and I'm just gonna check to make sure it's not null. I don't need to do this. And then if that's the case, then I just throw this new email exists exception. Otherwise, I'm just gonna return null because I'm not returning anything at that point. Okay, and you can see how this is gonna come into play in a minute. It's a little bit messy. That's why I'm creating a new method down here. I don't want to do it in this one because it's going to be like way too messy, but it's going to make sense once I start using it. So let's add this exception to the method signature, all of them. Okay, and we also need to do the same for this. So here, when we're calling this method now, we'll be able to pass in all the information that we need to pass in. So since this is a registration, right, I don't need to send anything for the current username because this is a brand new user. They don't have a current username yet. So here, I'm just going to call string util.empty. Okay, so that's an empty string here. I'm just going to call that. And then next, I can pass in the username. So I'm going to do username. And then I pass the email. Okay, so this method is gonna either throw an exception, or it's gonna return the user, or it's gonna return null, as you can see here. Okay, but either way, it will do the check for me, and it will tell me either I have an existing user or not, or if I can proceed or not. So let's go and add this to the method signature. That's gonna add the exception to the method signature. Okay, because I'm throwing it here. So since I'm using the private method in there, so I have to throw the same exception, because the same method right here, which is the register, it can also throw those exception because I'm calling it inside here.